Hello, thank you everybody joining us today, and welcome to another weekly digital strategy chat brought to you by Denver Data Web. We are a digital strategy company. We help our clients overcome their unique challenges and achieve their objectives, all while applying a goals-focused approach to web development, design, and digital marketing. My name is David Zonka. I am a digital strategist with Denver Data Web, and with me today we have our team, Sarah.
My name is Sarah. I am the digital marketing analyst at Denver Data Web.
And Tom.
Tom DeGurlia. I'm the founder and a senior marketing person.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Tom, and everybody else who's joining us today. So in a previous chat, we talked about how to avoid robotic sounding content. That was actually a pretty fun discussion we had. We've since kind of thought about how we want to dive into it more. We really scratched the surface on that idea, and we've gotten some questions about it. So we're going to circle back to that topic today, discuss some more of the best practices around that, creating captivating, readable, SEO optimized content. And I think this will be a really valuable discussion. As always, if you have any questions, those following along in the various digital marketing channels we're on here today, live streaming, please feel free to chime in chat and comments, send some of those additional questions. Otherwise, let's get right to it. So I just want to kind of bring it back a little bit and make sure we're all on the same page on what we actually mean by robotic sounding content.
So in general, the way we use search engines is kind of choppy. And the example that we kind of discussed earlier is the term, hold on one second. I should have had it in front of me.
Like natural language, really, or?
Yes. So we want to make sure that the content sounds very natural, and that it's not necessarily just geared for those choppy sounding keywords. So an example would be, like I mentioned, like the term Denver pizza pepperoni is a good way to introduce this.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily use those terms together in a sentence because it sounds very strange. You wouldn't say call to order Denver pizza pepperoni. So what we want to talk about is how to use keywords like that, how to rank for keywords like that without sounding that way. So that's.
I think that sounds perfectly normal, Sarah. What do you mean? No, I love that example. Right? Yeah. I'm sorry. Tom, I mean, what's your kind of take on that, Tom? I mean, do you think that sounds crazy to talk about Denver pepperoni pizza restaurant?
Denver pizza.
Oh, that's a very prudent move. No, I agree 100%. That you could get in a bad pinch, literally interpreting the key phrases that people would enter, and trying to place those into your content. It could sound pretty awkward.
I feel like I've searched that way in the past. I mean, I still do this sometimes. I think about the things, a lot of events going on these days, and I'm searching for them. And I look back at my search history, and I was like, why do I do that? I mean, I can't be the only one. Who's guilty of this kind of stuff?
Who's guilty of searching for it, or who's guilty of writing that?
I mean, like people search like this, they use those types of keywords. Even doing digital marketing this way.
Well, if you put it that way, everyone who uses a search engine or the internet in general is partially guilty of that. Search engines really rely on needing the smallest amount of information necessary. So they're not going to need those filler keywords, and they're not going to need necessarily a sentence structure. And we've all grown really accustomed to that. If you think back to the late 90s when we were starting to use search engines on a regular basis, ask.com came out, and their big gimmick was use a full sentence. You can write a whole question into here. And actually ask.com is still around, and it functions similar to other search engines now because people got used to not needing to write a whole sentence or a whole question, and not.
We were living in the future. What an amazing time.
So we don't necessarily need those filler keywords. So we've gotten very used to, just as a second nature, searching for very choppy terms. And then what happens is we search for those choppy terms. The whole area searches for those choppy terms, or the whole country. And then those very choppy terms become very popular, high-ranking keywords. And then when it circles back to the people writing content, we then have to use those choppy keywords properly in content to rank for those terms while still sounding like natural sounding content, which is a very strange full circle activity, but it's not impossible. We can do it.
How does anybody get any sleep at night thinking about all that stuff? I mean, Tom, does that ever keep you up at night thinking about choppy keywords? And
No, but I definitely get the chat. What you guys are describing is 100% correct. Yeah, it's a factor of the inception of the internet, or how it's evolved. That people started by searching the way a machine searches, and now it's gotten to the point where now the machine is searching the way people think a machine needs to search, which adds up to robotic communication.
Exactly. One of my coworkers a long time ago, not at Denver Data Web, but in the past, would find ways to restructure sentences so that they could use the plural version of a keyword if it was higher volume. And sometimes the sentences would come out sounding very strange because it didn't need a plural keyword, but because it was higher volume and because that was the data being reported, the sentences, he would try and structure the sentences that way. And I think that's just one example of many, many different ways when that can happen and create not so natural sounding content.
but does readable content and natural sounding content, I mean, does it really matter at the end of the day? I mean, I guess some people, they're going to understand a little more. I mean, what is the impact? Where does that ultimately go?
So I would say up until maybe even 2019 with the Google BERT update, it didn't matter as much. If you can easily make the argument like, oh, why would I write all this content? No one's going to read it. That's not necessarily true. People do read it. I looked up a recipe the other day and ended up reading a bunch of the content within it, which they don't anticipate you doing that. They do that for the SEO. But it is important because you want to create readable content because people are supposed to read it, at least in theory. And so you want it to be readable. And then when the BERT update came out in 2019, it was mainly to focus on voice search because maybe we get used to typing things a certain way or typing things in a choppy way. Sorry, hold on one second. I'm gonna pause these updates. I should have done that before.
Hey, we're living in the age of COVID, right? We're getting ping pongs everywhere, notifications, stuff like that. It's a fact of life.
Exactly. So let me go back to where I was. Okay, so the BERT update in 2019 was mostly focused on voice search. And because although we've gotten used to typing very choppy search queries, when we speak to our devices, we tend to continue using full sentences. Like, where can I find the closest Chinese restaurant or something like that? And that's a full sentence. Whereas when you would search for that in Google, you would maybe write Chinese restaurant near me or something like that. So because people are voice searching and using full sentences, Google took that into consideration, and they made it so that they are ranking your site based on the readability of your content. So it became even more integral in 2019 to be able to write readable content while still ranking properly in Google. So it's become a much more important thing.
Yeah, and I think your point about who's going to people's this element of who's going to read the content, really is only your best prospects if you can afford to not let them, give them something. So it seems like a disservice to ignore that.
Exactly.
And I guess another point that that the cornerstone of good marketing is good human readable content. And that is the standard that Google is trying to aim for. And so I think that's certainly the starting point if you want to have good, authentic content, not black hat techniques and such.
Black hat. And so when we use the term black hat, what we mean like doing some kind of shadier types of techniques that, to get the best results, but they might not be very useful to the people who are actually surfing the web, kids. That's a term I haven't said in here. So.
Sarah, what are some famous ones, black hat techniques that happened over time?
Oh, I kind of mentioned before, well, that's backlinking, that's not content. We'll stick with content. One of the most famous ones is taking a JPEG or a white background or blue background, and then having keywords written within the JPEG in the exact same color. And you can write like, well, you can't do it, you shouldn't do it. But people would write like hundreds and hundreds of keywords in the same color as the background. And you would end up ranking for those keywords, but it is quite black hat. You should not do that. And then
Those
in
were the
addition,
days.
what's that?
I was just thinking to myself, those were the days. What a crazy time to be alive.
But then, I mean, I guess a more modern version of that that's not as I guess not as sketchy, but still not great is keyword stuffing, where you would take a sentence that could otherwise be readable and just put your keywords in there over and over and over again. And I think I have an example of that too. Hold on one second, let me find it.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like a little bit what we're talking about here today is, keywords being in your sentences in a way that doesn't really make sense, but it's somehow, we're talking about this is now digital marketers doing this kind of thing, not just the searching behavior. You're putting these keywords in a sentence in a way that doesn't really make sense to a reader, but somehow, it's thought that it'll get a better result from an SEO standpoint.
Yeah, and going back to the pizza example, I'm looking back at a blog I wrote recently, which I'll put in the comments after we post this live. Call to order a delicious Denver pizza pepperoni from our Denver pizza restaurant. That makes no sense. That's confusing. That is absolutely keyword stuffing. And you can actually still find that to this day. People can still get away with that. And I got
one for you. But is it keyword stuffed crust?
Yes.
Dad jokes all day. That's all I got.
And you can still see that to this day, especially when you're trying to fit like your keyword modifier, your keyword geo modifier all in one sentence. And then, I mean, you double that up twice in one sentence, 3 times in one paragraph, and you're pretty much writing the same thing over and over again. And it sounds terrible. And that's something that Google has definitely been better about cracking down on in especially the last few years.
Yeah, my rule of thumb has been at the point where you're cooking up poor human communication, it may get you a short-term gain in some crafty way, but the Google is soon enough going to weed that out, and it's going to cost you more. That's
exactly right. You'll probably, if you do that all over your website, you'll probably see an initial gain, an initial like boost. But then Google or whatever other search engine is gonna realize what you're doing, and it's gonna catch up to you. It's gonna say like, I mean, your search rankings can be negatively affected by keyword stuffing. Absolutely, even more than if you didn't have those keywords on the site.
Well, and more importantly, and the part that people ignore is that if humans can't read it, you've lost the essential piece.
Yeah,
that's people are searching so they can get to the site to interact with it in some way.
Until you're selling to robots, that is pretty critical. I mean, sometimes it's probably not intentional though, right? I mean, there's some keywords are just awkward in general. Like, what if you got keywords that just don't normally fit very well? I mean, I can't really think of any off the top of my head, but I mean, if you have something like that, there's still ways you can use them in a way that could be readable or some tactics.
Couch sectional Denver. That's a very awkward keyword, or really anything. Like a lot of, especially long-tailed keywords, they're very confusing and they don't sound very good, but they make sense to search for, kind of like going back to what we were saying before. And in order to use them in a sentence, it's impossible in order to keep it readable and still do that. But what's important to note is, this is a big secret, you don't have to use those exact terms. As long as you have those keywords, or at least those base keywords, relatively close together in a readable human format in a sentence, you are likely going to place for that word. So if the keyword is couches sectional Denver, you can't use that in a way that makes sense in a sentence, but you can say, come visit our sectional couch showroom in our Denver location, or something like that. And that's still relatively close together enough where you will likely place for that keyword. And I mean, Google or other search engines, their AI is smart enough to understand what that means. They're smart enough to get context from your content and understand what you're talking about. So having to use those keywords exactly how you find them, or exactly how any of your tools show them to you. That's actually not necessary. And it's something that it's a little bit difficult to understand when you go to SEMrush or Google Keyword Planner and you find out that having the words in a readable format has a lower search volume than having those exact same words in a much choppier format. But as long as you're using them in a way that makes sense, you'll actually probably rank better than even someone who finds a way to use those terms in a non-choppy format. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. In Keyword Planner, so one thing you mentioned there, so Keyword Planner, that's a tool that Google provides for people looking for the search volume, like let's say on a monthly basis for a particular keyword phrase or something. And people like us, digital marketers and strategists, and even folks, we're kind of delving into it. You use that to get a sense for, hey, maybe this is a keyword for my subject area that I should incorporate into my content, my language from an SEO standpoint, because there's a lot of people interested in. There's a lot of search volume. I find it fascinating that there's elements of those keywords that you're seeing in there. They might have different volumes from different structures of the use of those keywords, the way they're laid out. But Google might actually just, at the end of the day, just might ignore that at the time that the search is occurring, just because it seems like your language is close enough. Maybe whether you have the plural form of it or the words are in a slightly different order. Is that really? So that's kind of how it goes.
Those search volumes that you're finding are literal. So if someone is searching the exact term, Denver pizza pepperoni 30 more times a month than like pizza pepperoni in Denver, that's very literal. That goes down to what people are putting in their search bar, not necessarily what Google is looking for when those searches occur. So if you're using a term in a much more readable way that still has those words or those base words in a way that meets the query, then yes, there's no reason why you wouldn't rank for that. So it is difficult. It is, in that way, it can be almost a counterintuitive process to see it that way when Google's like, this way makes less sense, but it's a higher volume. But then again, it's very, very literal. It's exactly what people are putting in their search bar that gets you those numbers, not necessarily how those terms meet the standards of the content.
Tom, you got a lot of background in pay-per-click advertising. Do you see that, this kind of phenomenon play out there as well?
I was thinking the same thing, that doing pay-per-click with Google Ads gives you a little insight into how Google thinks, or how their logic, their matching algorithm works. And I think Sarah's exactly right, that the end user may search in several different ways to get to the same concept, but the Google will typically abstract that into, this is these three words and these variations of those words in any order, and that is one thing that it then links off to the destination. And it certainly could be confusing, but by all means, pay-per-click gives some pretty good insight there.
When I was kind of, refreshing my memory on some of the things involved with, natural language search is kind of like the concept and the BERT update in, we talk about these named updates, that Sarah mentioned. Google is like to do that over time. It has a big core update to how their search engine works. They give it a name. I recall one of the things that changed over the year was the ability to ask even more, more complex questions, which I thought, was a neat development over time, rather than just some really big stuff. I remember, I was kind of pulling through some articles we've done and seen over time. And one example was, who was the US president when the Angels won the World Series? That's a really specific question. And some people, that's what they want to know. And it really, I think a lot of that was, my intuition is developed around voice search, right? Like the ability to facilitate, you mentioned that earlier, Sarah, is like people searching through their devices. So, what does that mean, right? That's like Siri and stuff like that.
Yeah, Siri, Google Home, Alexa. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I think it was yesterday or the day before, I was in my kitchen and I did just that. I asked a complex question to my Google device. The question was, can I leave the lid off my crock pot if I want it to evaporate or something like that? And the answer it spit back out at me was exactly the answer I wanted to know.
Who doesn't know that, Sarah? I mean, come on.
I thought it was fantastic that it understood my complex question and it gave me like such a perfect answer in such concise words. And told me where it was from, told me like the reference with it. So it's getting better, even more than a few months ago. And so absolutely, yeah.
Don't confuse that with intelligence, though.
That's all we got here is intelligence. Only accepted from the source. Do you use voice search much, Tom? Like Siri and things like that, and Cortana?
I will be lazy as often as I can physically be lazy, and that was actually a revelation to me that when Sarah brought up kind of the evolution of the internet, and because I think of ask.com, if you recall, was Ask Jeeves, and Ask Jeeves is it's been the butt of a lot of jokes over the years, so it's it's just fascinating to watch how the whole thing has evolved. Sorry, I lost my point. If you can remind me what I'm going after. I don't think I answered the question, is what I'm saying.
That's okay. So I think some of the things I'd really like to know, Sarah, and it's going to be valuable for everybody. We think of readability and working with content that we put in, whether it's blogs on our website or maybe even advertisements, right? Do you have some good actionable tips on how to format that content so you don't end up with a really long series of a boring page of words, something more readable?
Yeah. I've mentioned before, and I'll describe this first, and then we can launch into the bulk of that answer. But I mentioned before that as far as optimizing content to be more readable, you can really just write it down naturally first and then go in afterwards and optimize with keywords. And if you're not really the content writing type, but you're tasked with that, whether it's your business or otherwise, there are tools like Otter.ai, is that what it is, Tom? That'll help you kind of craft that content, and then you can go in afterwards and optimize it and kind of change it up how you want. And that's even just like writing the readable aspect of content. As far as formatting it in a way that's SEO friendly and then also readable and just easy to follow and easy to navigate, you can use a content wireframe or even a page wireframe, and that even just that little bit of help can show you like different ways that you can introduce the page or introduce the pain point for the page, and then follow up with how you can solve the problem, your product or service to do that. And it'll kind of guide you through the content process and how people naturally read a page of content. Like, I have this pain point, or I have this issue and I'm looking for a solution, and it can guide you through that way. I was working on an article for that this week. I had hoped to have it live by today, but it should be live in a few weeks, which I'll also post in the comments when we have this live.
Yeah.
But content wireframes or content templates are very helpful. And in addition to that, they help you structure the content in a way where you're adding headers, or you're adding H1s and H2s, H3s, and so on, which has a big impact on how Google reads your site and how it affects rankings. So I guess to kind of reiterate everything I just said, creating readable content is the first part, but then also structuring it in a way that where search engines could properly crawl your page and rank your page is the second step of that.
I agree 100%. That was the advice I would have given, is write it naturally and then go in and write it as good communication, and then go in and swap your keywords in a way that doesn't destroy that communication value. Other tools that I've had luck with lately, Grammarly, which I might as well be a salesperson for them at this point.
This show's not sponsored by Grammarly, by the way. It is a great tool, right? I mean, what do you use it for?
I do, and it's getting to the point where it makes very practical readability it gives recommendations to readability that won't necessarily help you write it, but will help you take something that might come off the top of your head and turn it into something that a human might be able to read. And Sarah's advice of, record it in voice, because most people are much more comfortable communicating a concept in voice than they are sitting down on a piece of paper. So that's a good place to start, is just record it, translate it using something like Otter, and then refine it from there with a tool like Grammarly, and you can have you practically be done. The other thing I've come to find is that, and what has made writing content much more pleasant for me, almost second nature, is the formulaic nature of marketing communication, in that really the things that you do conceptually are the same every time, depending on the context of the communication. And so I can it's like writing an essay where what they told us in college was, you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you told them what you just told them. And it's not unlike that.
It's a good formula.
Yeah.
Those are some great ideas. Any other ones you can think of? I mean, I think we covered a lot, actually.
One last point I want to make, and I've mentioned this before also, is that when you're creating that natural content, you're writing things in a way that you would when you speak to a customer, when you speak to a friend about your business. One thing that you'll notice is that you're probably going to use a lot of your keywords naturally to begin with. So rather than writing content in a way where you're forcing those things in there, when you do start, you'll find that you're probably using a lot of the keywords you want to anyway.
Yeah, in fact, that's at the point where I start agonizing to squeeze the keywords in. I start wondering if those are really my keywords, or if I'm thinking about my business wrong.
I know that the keywords that I use the most are and Anytime I'm like, but I own that. That's okay. We're all people here. Well, we're actually bumping up against the time for today. That was actually a ton of great ideas. So thank you, Sarah and Tom, for that. Everybody, be sure to look out for links where we post this on social media, on our YouTube channel, and on our website at denverdata.com. We're going to have a couple great articles on this topic with some additional resources and probably some links to tools like we mentioned here today that'll help you write readable content. Be sure to like and subscribe to get notifications for future strategy chats like this and to get more actionable information. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us, and have